What if you wanted to be a writer early on in life, but didn't understand your path to success in the field? What if your journey led you to standing up the MARSOC Raiders and experiencing the full effect of the awesome capabilities our United States Marines have at a tactical level? What if you experienced a traumatic brain injury, but were able to mitigate its effects by utilizing writing as therapy? What if that experience led to a New York Times bestseller and publications over dozens of media outlets covering not just the military, but a sport that you enjoy? Join me as I speak with Russell Worth Parker about his journey from the military to writing to what he's doing now within the veterans writing therapy space. This is Veteran Success Story. Welcome to another episode of Veteran Success Story. Today, I'm joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Russell Worth Parker. Worth is involved in the writing space, multiple avenues. I'm going to have to put everything in the description link, but the two that we really focused on were Book War, which is his social media account, and I'll put all these again in the description links, but he's the editor of the Lethal Minds Journal. Furthermore, he also runs a writing workshop with the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance. He's helping other veterans share their own stories, but use writing therapy as something to help bring forward these stories and face these traumas that, whatever these people faced within war and within wartime, that they can get this stuff off. They can face this through this particular process. I hope you enjoy the episode. Like, follow, and subscribe for more. We really get into it on this one. I loved having this conversation with Worth, and you guys are going to enjoy it. I'm telling you, go check out Lethal Minds Journal in the meantime as well when you get a chance. So thank you for joining us on yet another Veteran Success Story. Welcome to Veteran Success Story. Today I'm speaking with Lieutenant Colonel retired Russell Worth Parker, who, just the things you're doing out there with writing within the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance. You're running the Lethal Minds Journal. I know that you're a contributor to a bunch of other, I've seen stuff from like Warhorse, the outdoors stuff that you do. But really what brought me, the moth to the flame anyway, is the fact that I follow you on social. And I think it was either through the Damn the Valley project, and where we kind of crossed paths there, but hearing about what you were doing with the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance there, with some of the therapeutic writing and holding those workshops and everything, where I was like, yes, that information or that type of workshop needs to be out there, because I know myself, the value in it is just massive. I didn't even realize some of the stuff I was holding on to until I started writing it down and processing it. And that's thanks for coming on to the show and sharing.
Oh, well, thanks for being willing to have me on and saying those very kind things. It has been an interesting journey, and not one I ever anticipated taking prior to retirement. But it's given me a great option to stay connected to the community that I was a part of for 27 years, but also do something very different.
Yeah, that's, that was man, if I could echo that same thing, it really is. It's like some of those projects out there, like, the book I never wanted to write, or the podcast was another guy had written down his stories off of, basically it was like, it was Andrew Bragg with the Devil's Playground. And I need to connect you guys, because his heart is in the right place, and what they're doing with the guys within that platoon that they served with, just incredible stuff, that they've been able to keep that connection together and alive, and that how much they've worked together and putting and compiling that together. I'm going to have to get you guys.
Yeah, I'd be interested to talk to him for sure.
Yeah. So really, I want to back up, because we're talking about some of this, but in the show, I want to kind of bring your background and stuff out. So Marines, I know I was Army on that end, but you're North Carolina, and was Wilmington, like, where did you What's your kind of story through the service look like?
So my quick story, I grew up in Athens, Georgia. And I went to the University of Colorado when I was a ROTC kid for 4 years out there. And I did 4 years active service in the Marine Corps, and then decided, I'm going to do other things. And the truth was, old First Lieutenant Parker was still pretty much a child, and he wasn't getting exactly what he wanted. So he decided to go to the reserves and go to grad school. And I really didn't understand that process either, and was relying on nepotism to get me into graduate school. I got a very good lesson when I did not get into my graduate program, and I ended up derailed doing some civilian stuff as well as serving in the reserves. Anyway, long story short, I ended up in law school. And after my second year of law school, I was activated and went to Iraq and got to do what First Lieutenant Parker had wanted to do, and be a platoon commander at 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company in Western Iraq. That was a pretty major experience for me. Came home, finished law school, and was like, I want to do that other stuff. I don't really want to practice law. So the Marine Corps was starting the Marine Special Operations Command, and all my buddies from Force Recon or a bunch of them were the kind of seed corn for it. And so I was graduating law school, and the Marine Corps was engaged in 2 hot wars. It was 2006. And they sent out a message going, "Hey, reservists, anybody want to come back to active duty?" So I did, and I stayed at various assignments within SOCOM for the next 16 years. And then I retired in 2021. And I'd started writing loosely in 2015, kind of by accident. And I wrote a piece that I say went Marine Corps viral, and now there's a couple places that publish it every year on Memorial Day. But I liked it, the way that felt, and I liked the connections that created for me. By which I mean interpersonal, not like, oh, somebody's calling you to give you a good deal. And so I kept doing it a little bit, and I ended up writing some for some other a Raider founded or business called Softfleet, which is a bunch of soft guys. So I wrote for Softfleet for a long time, and still good friends with all those guys. And back then I was writing, 2 or 3 or 4,000 words for $25 and some protein powder. And I had no idea how the business worked, and I'm still just figuring it out, truthfully. But anyway, those guys were wonderful to me, and I often credit them with kind of giving me a start, because they gave me a place to get a little more confident about writing. And I use weightlifting analogies a fair bit. Like, it was a chance to get reps. And so I got those reps in a pretty forgiving environment. And then I sent that original essay I'd written in 2015 to a woman I was loosely connected with, who was at the New York Times. And she said, I love this, but you've already put this on social media, and the New York Times doesn't do seconds. You want to try and write something else? Which I've since learned, and would say to any other aspiring writers / veteran writers out there, if an editor ever gives you the slightest crack in the door, you kick it open. So I wrote an essay for them that got published. I wanted to write one other essay about a Labrador, about a dog that I got when I got home from Iraq, and get that published in a magazine called Garden and Gun. And I managed, through a long process and some people that knew a lot more than me giving me advice iteratively, to eventually sell them that story. And I just figured I was going to go do what retired lieutenant colonels do, be a contractor somewhere. And very, very happily, my now agent's wife read both of those essays in close succession to one another, and nudged her husband one night in bed and said, "You need to go find this guy." And he did. So I thought that was a Nigerian print scam when I got the email. Ultimately figured out he was for real. And so I've been signed with him now for 6 years, and mostly to write up, to, do credited writing or ghost writing, or write other people's stories. And I've just continued to learn how to survive in the magazine writing business, and breaking into some other commercial aspects. But it's been a super cool trip.
Heck yeah, that sounds, man, living the dream there. But it also sounds like, you followed your heart with that stuff, instead of putting that, like in the beginning, the potential and stuff there. You said it before. I was doing this for me. I was following that feeling of it. instead of following that network stuff that you kind of see so often of, hey, we want to make this narrative. Or have you come across that, or at least had maybe some ghostwriting pitches and stuff come along, like, hey, we want to create this world over that end?
I mean, my guest writing work, and I've sold and written one book, and then pitched probably three or four, that, got to various stages of almost, before not happening. And it's an interesting world. What I would say about, as far as following your heart, like people tell you follow your bliss or whatever, and I say don't follow your bliss, follow your talent. Um, and it turns out that this was a thing I'm better at than a lot of other things I might have tried to do. And my best friend is an investment banker, and he's made scads and scads and scads of money after leaving the Marine Corps to be an investment banker. And making money for a lot of years was his bliss. Later in life, he's starting to look at other things. But for me, things that were my bliss might have been things I was not very good at. And I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Scott Galloway who echoes what I'm saying, and I'll only take credit for figuring it out before he told me. But do the thing you're good at, and you'll figure the rest of it out, and at least enough money will follow. Now, that being said, this is again something I say to qualify things. It's hard to be a writer. The average American writer makes somewhere around $6,500 a year. That being said, a very good and successful writer friend of mine says that's a pretty lazy writer. And I might tend to agree, but it's not a lucrative profession. You got to be burning and turning and cranking. But if you are like me and you've got a military retirement and, you're married to a lawyer, it gets a little easier.
I've told a lot of people that if you're either getting retirement or were unfortunately disabled or something throughout your time in service, but use that as your base, and then find, like what you were saying, what makes you happy, but what you're good at, and start chipping away at it, figure it out.
Well, I think that's key. Like I lived in the Marine Corps on passion for a lot of years. Everything I did because I looked at it and went, oh, that looks cool. And there were, times I suffered career-wise through decisions I made. Nothing anybody else did, but I decided to get out. I decided to come back in full-time 8 years later. The Marine Corps has a particular way that they want to move their officers up the chain, and I was really blessed to retire as a lieutenant colonel, honestly, given that I had cut out and come back in. So again, no shade thrown, just an acknowledgement that I did not walk a straight path. And I was never going to be a guy that walks a straight path through life, not because I'm, rebelling against, what do you got? But because I don't really see the path very well. I just see the next thing that looks cool and go, I could do that for a while. That looks cool.
Yeah.
And I'm really blessed that writing supports that tendency, which is kind of why I go back to saying, as somebody, if you're getting ready to transition, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do next. It's great if you're somebody who can lock in, go to business school, start the process thereafter. 5 years later, you're ripping down $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year and some crazy bonus pattern. Wonderful if that feeds you.
Yeah.
But I figured out I enjoyed the hell out of law school, but I didn't want to practice law. And I probably would have, be more, we're fine, but I would probably be whatever, have more money, which seems to be the measure most people use. If I just jumped in and started practicing law in 2006, then decided to go be a Marine Raider, and I would probably, be doing fiscally better if I had locked into retired lieutenant colonel with multiple graduate degree, go to work for, pick the letter agency, pick the massive contracting company, but I would have been miserable.
I agree. I know a lot of people like that. They follow the path that society says instead of figuring it out for themselves. And it's either they sit in that misery, but they're making the bank, so they're justifying it, because really, as a society, that dollar amount is you can look at that. It's measurable in an easy metric way, to where you can't really, you can measure happiness, but it's really dependent on each person and what they're doing. And yeah, it just goes down a whole whole different path.
I mean, I'm a capitalist. I don't knock the pursuit of money at all. If you're somebody for whom, pursuit of money gives me 49% of my pleasure and I fill the rest in with what the money affords me, you're awesome. You're kicking life right in the tail.
Yeah.
But for me, I've had a couple corporate jobs when I was out. I had one very good job as a pharmaceutical salesman, and everybody was like, "Oh, you're on the path. That's a great job." At 26 or whatever I was, it is a great job, and it was great people. The pay was great. The conditions were amazing. Everything was amazing. And 2 years into it, I was done. And then I went to law school, and then, like you say, I went right back to doing the thing that I had always wanted to do, which was be a Marine and be a special operator. Of course, the Marine Corps didn't have the opportunity to be a special operator, but I wanted to be a Force Recon guy.
Yeah.
And when I realized as a reservist in Force Recon that I was living for my reserve weekends more than I was for the 28 days a month I was something else, I was like, okay, this value system is completely inverted. You need to just do the thing, get it out of your system.
Reserves is such a hard gig too. Like I did 3 years of it after I got out, and man, they expect from you in a reserve company just as much as the active duty, but like you're like, hey, when are you supposed to do this? Like in my off time with all my extra other stuff that I'm doing, like within school and a job, and because I just transitioned out of the Army. So you got to be kidding me. And they're, well, we could put you on the books full time for this, but not until you're qualified here. And it's never even got me.
And I don't want to be on the books full time. I got out for a reason. I'm trying to start a life. Listen, I have all the respect in the world for the reserve community because A, I've been a part of it, but B, it is hard, and in a lot of ways, it is a lot harder than active service. And I did about 22 years of active service and about 6 years worth of reserve duty, and I feel pretty qualified on both. And it's a balance, right? Certainly, your active service folks are typically more competent at the specifics of their job. It's just the nature of it all. But you also have, if you got a sergeant who's 28, he runs a business in real life. And, maybe it's a lawn care business, but he's an E5. He runs a crew of 12. He makes payroll. He's buying, he's selling, he's coordinating. He's frankly doing a whole lot more than a rifle squad leader is doing every day at Camp Lejeune. And that's no shade on that job either. It's a hard job and one that is beloved to me, but it's just not the same.
Trying to find that split. Like it really is. It's almost like living the dual lives there. And for the people that run active duty and are working on the side afterwards, if they get the commander's approval sometimes, that's tough.
No, it absolutely is. And I think I think it's important as somebody who has gone to war as both a reservist and an active service guy who's worked with a whole host of everybody across the field. It's just important to recognize what everybody brings to the fight, as it were, and what everybody sacrifices. I went to Afghanistan as an active duty guy, and my wife was pregnant when I left, and I had a 6-day-old when I got home, and that was super hard. But she also was, my wife, my first combat deployment, and was the key volunteer for a bunch of reserve wives spread all across America. And you take casualties, and you're trying to help family members who are 5 states away, and it's a tough beast to be in the reserves. So all the credit in the world to them.
So 21, you found yourself, you had something to do with the exit from Kabul, correct?
I did, in that like a lot of people, I jumped in and tried to make something out of that mess. And I say that in an apolitical sense. I mean, the quick story, I retired June 30th of 2021. And on July 5th, I threw my daughter in an RV and we started driving around America. And then my wife met us out in Bozeman, Montana, and drove the rest of the way home with us. And along the way, I was watching the news out of Afghanistan, which is what I had done, but I also was very intentionally trying to not pay attention, and not because I saw some impending horror happening. It was just that I was like, oh, the Taliban took Lashkar-Gah again? Yeah, well, no shit. That's what they do every spring.
Yeah.
And, the commandos will go down there and kick them back out, and that'll be fine. And then I just started noticing, okay, now they're up north. Now they've taken a district center closer to Kabul. And I was like, that's not normal. So by the time I got home, I don't know, I think August 12th of that year is where the date is. Yeah, I'm home. I'm in my bed, and I get a text, or excuse me, an instant message on Facebook from a guy, and I knew who he was through Softlead, actually, but he was a prior Afghan interpreter. He'd done 7 years between service with the Marines and SF guys, and then he immigrated here, and he enlisted in the Marine Reserve. So he's a lance corporal on the weekends, and he's like, hey, sir, my family's, all in Kabul. They're still working with various organizations within the Gyroa. Can you help get them out? And I'm like, dude, I'm a retired middle manager in my bed in Wilmington, North Carolina, reading an instant message, but you're a lance corporal. I'm a lieutenant colonel. There's a sacred obligation there. And when the lance corporal asks the lieutenant colonel to do something important, the lieutenant colonel does everything he or she can do to make it happen if they're righteous. But again, I was retired. But the guy who was the commander of the MEU in Afghanistan at the time at the airport was a buddy of mine. And I knew a couple other folks who were on the ground there, and I just started texting. And then that led to what ended up being, 2.5 weeks of working to get folks out. That's what led to me writing a book, with Tom Schumann and Zainul Zaki, about Tom trying to get Zach out of Afghanistan really for 10 years. And he was on one of the the worst infantry battalion deployment casualty wise of the war. And I know yours was horrific. I've read your book. I've read Ben Kessling's book. And I was tracking, casualties at that time because I was in country when you were there. But I also was in country when Tom's battalion, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse, was in fighting in Sangin. And they had, I think, 25 KIA, and then north of 120 single, double, triple amputees. And I've since talked to a lot of Marines through the writing therapy work I do who were infantrymen or anyone really in Sangin. And guys, and I think it was probably true for you in Kandahar too. I served with a lot of Army folks over the years. So and most of them were graduates of the 82nd, the Ranger Regiment, et cetera. So they paid very close attention what was happening to y'all where you were. But guys in Sangin talking about going out with tourniquets on their arms and legs before they ever stepped outside the wire.
Yep.
That is not a thing I did in Iraq. I did not think to that extent. We thought IEDs, but we were in vehicles, and I was doing HVT hits at 2:00 in the morning. If we got hit, it was a really, really, really switched on enemy who was trying really hard to hit us. It wasn't, we're walking out in the village again.
Yeah, man. I think a lot of those stories and stuff too, they kind of echo across the GWAT. Especially the Afghanistan stuff. People look at that, the stories from the book, and it's like all this stuff happened across the board. No one is like more, I'm hard because I was here or there. Like, I got it. You might have had some more experiences, and essentially, from what I was told from a lot of the guys, as well as some of the other people I worked with down the road, they were just like, you got to be kidding me. Some people thought I was making this stuff up because they were like, there's no way a single deployment had that much going on within it. And I'm like, no, it was pretty rough.
No, it absolutely did. I would say I call myself something of a tourist in Afghanistan, which is weird because I got a lot of love and a lot of connection. I spent 13 months there, but I was with 2 separate soft task forces headquartered at Bagram. And I slept in as safe as anybody. In my second tour, I had a chew all to myself, even had TV. So, I was very cognizant of how, as I got older and older, my life was getting softer and softer. But because of working for those task forces, I was also really cognizant on the daily of what was going on countrywide. And you live how you think how you come from. And as a guy who grew up in the infantry and recon and those worlds, like, I'm still very connected to that experience mentally. And then again, both those deployments were basically under Army units because you spell SOF ARMY. And so I have a lot of friends who, as I said, were either SF folk or Rangers or, the various career tracks that spring from that. And those people were all, and some of them had kids, right? They're in country doing their thing as colonels and generals and lieutenant colonels. And they had sons and daughters who were down in the Argandab or in Sangin, or out west, in Coast. And so just like you said, I agree with you. Like, I don't do a whole lot of, measuring. But when somebody tells me, yes, I was in 11 whatever series, or I was in 03XX series, in those places, I automatically ascribe a certain something to them. I've been to all of those places. I did not fight in any of those places. And so I just have a lot of respect and admiration and understanding for what those folks endured simply by dint of how they were assigned, which is the nature of being an infantryman. You just suck it up.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. And at the same time, for the people that either are, you can't do it alone. It's you might have that rifle company and stuff out there like we did. We had PJs on station and stuff that would come flying in usually within 10 minutes, of making that 9 line up, which was insane. Because we did have regular Army show up for a few of them, and you could tell the difference because you're like, where's the freaking bird? But at the same, you can't do this stuff without other people out there. Some of the best Delta peoples that I've talked to and everything, they'll even say it. They'll be like, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do it without this unit out there. Like, we need the support.
They should. Everyone should acknowledge that truth. Like,
yeah,
as a career, I was a MARSOC guy from 9 months after the doors opened, and I was helping guys who were there on day one plan before day one, just because they were my friends, and all the way till I retired. I mean, I never spent a day of the last 16 years not in a quote soft unit. It may have been big headquarters, but my point in saying that is I remember a general who shall go unnamed, only out of respect to him, who, again, his resume was he was an 82nd, a 75th, that guy. And he's like, we'll never lose one of our units because we have, AWT, Airborne Weapons Team, Aerial Weapons Team, whatever, AC-130, F-15, F-117, B-2, B-1, whatever, stacked up overhead.
Yeah.
A whole lot different from, I think back to the days when I was a Force Recon guy and we were at least titularly the tip of that spear. I was lucky to have a Huey and a Cobra on station during these HVT raids. And there were plenty of times when I felt like it's just us out here. We got to figure it out. And even more so if you were an infantry platoon commander in 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. So I think especially the farther up that pointy spear chain you think you are, the more incumbent it is to recognize that in this point, there's thousands of people who are making it possible for you to do what you do and survive it.
We had a few instances to where, we were sending up the target packages and stuff. We had task force coming in, and whenever the Rangers would come in, it was like, man, we got a nice little break for, 8 hours or so, as long as we weren't pulling outer cordon, because we knew all of the other assets and stuff. And it was just like, let them do their thing. We already sent up the package. We know what's going on. Let's just back off, let them do their thing, make the hit.
And I think it's just, know who you are and know where you are. And I've got, great friends. I love the Rangers. I have a tremendous amount of love for the Army Ranger Regiment, or the 75th Ranger Regiment, rather. But I think back to a conversation I had with a Marine sergeant in 2004 or 5. And my job, as I say, I was a quote direct action platoon commander for 2nd Force Recon. So we were the hammer swingers for that particular battalion-based task force, paired up with a grunt battalion. And we just went out every night to do the ultra violence, as I used to say. And I remember talking to a Marine one morning at breakfast, and we'd been in a firefight that night, very close inside a house kind of scenario. And a kid, that Marine, not kid, that young man was saying, I don't think I could do that. And I remember I didn't say it at the time because I didn't want to acknowledge this to him or myself out loud, but he was a member of what they called a mobile assault platoon at the time, which basically was grunts driving around looking for IEDs with their tires and feet. Um, and I had so much admiration for those young men's ability to get up and go out and do that over and over and over again. It's just inestimable courage.
Oh, it's a psychological mind fuck, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that, I know you read it in there, but that having to face that every day and going out there, and it's like, all right, well, who's it going to be this time, kind of thing, because you just knew.
Right. Yeah, not if, but when. And that was not mathematically a reality for us in Iraq because, as I say, I was typically out between 11 o'clock at night and 5 in the morning. In fact, my boss typically told me, be back before daylight. And I think about that too. I mean, I did do multi-day ops where I slept on the ground and did real life infantryman stuff. And frankly, those are some peak experiences in my mind. But by and large, at least within the way the GWAT worked, if you're a sexy unit guy, chances are you went out late at night, you came back for breakfast, you played a lot of Xbox, you didn't stand a post, you didn't stand, at a checkpoint waiting on a VBID to drive up. Which is not to diminish any, I mean, I won't say names, but, I watched Ranger companies do one particular mission that I think was the most infantry mission of all infantry missions ever. And I sat just in awe, and, as a lieutenant colonel in the headquarters, watching those things transpire. And it was like, that is the absolute pinnacle of infantriness. And I can't respect it anymore, but I also can't not distinguish the difference between, going out for 5 to 8 days and walking around in Sangin, as a buddy of mine did as a company commander at 3rd Recon Battalion, and living on the ground and living off food you could find, versus, okay, yeah, we'll be back in 6 hours.
Very different. Yeah, I know there was a lot of them where we would start to, you'd see the guys hanging on the rails, burning over us on the little birds, and you're like, what the heck, man? We just walked over, marked the compound, backed off, and like, you get the hit? You got to be kidding me. This is
There's
not
that
cool.
too. There's absolutely that part of it too. But I mean, so that plays into my larger point now in all of this, which is that, I was trained for years. I didn't talk. I didn't do social media. And then I started writing and I liked it. Somebody's got to tell the stories. And somebody's got to tell the stories well and efficiently and effectively. And one of my things now is I just don't ever want to write anything that somebody who served with me 10 or 15 years ago would read and go, I do not remember him as such a douche, but I guess people change. But I also think it is incumbent on us as the veterans to cross what I perceive as a very real civilian military divide. It's not the civilians' obligation, it's ours.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I would say that disparity is growing. And really within the veteran community too, you see a lot of, there's the measuring contest kind of thing. And then there's it is, it's crazy. It's crazy. I've heard you say it before on another one, and stuff too, but really when you start breaking it down and everything, I in talking with some of the Vietnam guys, I really haven't had too much interaction with the World War II guys and stuff, but you've said how to veteran, and I'm trying to figure that out right now, because I'm like, how do I, seeing any support from the GWAT end of things, a lot of it is the SOF and SF and Marine Raiders and stuff. They get a lot of that attention, and it's like there's a whole larger umbrella under there of a lot of the conventional people, and a lot of them just seem very disenfranchised over stuff. They want nothing to do with the veteran community or part of a veteran event. And I'm like, how do we draw them into this? How do we make this an actual community instead of it being something to where it's, for lack of better terms, a pissing match?
Well, I think, you talk about that World War II community. I'm part of the Marine Raider Association, and that started in the very early 1950s, when all the post-World War II Raiders still wanted to keep something together of the Raider regiment that was briefly in existence. And the whole Raider thing only lived for about 3 years. But it was so impactful on about 4,000 Marines' lives that they maintained these cellular reunion structures and then a big national reunion every year. And they raised their kids and then subsequently grandkids within that thing who felt super invested in their grandparent or their father's actions. But the real point is that even though those guys seem to live it and love it, and be so proud of it, and it was a huge part of who they were and how they lived the rest of their lives, it wasn't their whole identity. They still had to get a real job. They still had to make a living. Now, A, we're super balkanized. Two, the way that we can make a living is so vastly different. I make my living here in this room, from my house, which is lovely. But if I can sell something I did 15 or 20 years ago as a way of showing what a super badass I am now and how I can teach you to be an alpha male warrior, stud, wolf, or whatever, that profit margin and profit motive, again, not against profits, but it's gross. And it drives me, in air quotes, to then sell my story that much harder and distinguish myself that many more different ways. And meanwhile, I look at it and I go, say you were an SF guy in the Argandab, an ODA paired with an Afghan unit. What were you? You were an enabler for 11 series Afghans, right? And I used to say all the time to our Marines, especially when it first stood up MARSOC, if you could raise your partner unit to the barest essential standard of a rifle platoon in 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, you're a soft rock star. So, if we're acting like we're serving with the most elite units, it's all, how do you start parsing that sort of thing out? Because some days you're literally taking your partner force by the scruff of the neck and going, no, walk this way. Whereas meanwhile, you put me in a platoon of, 40, 11 Bravos, 30 of them know pretty much what they're supposed to be doing, and the rest of them will figure it out. And that's a pretty significant level of capability.
There's always those cats you gotta herd a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, right, there's always going to be those, when you're dealing with first enlistment soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, guardians, and whatever, Coast Guardsmen, women, whatever. There's always that one who's like, I'm not sure how you found the recruiter's office.
Yes,
but here you are now.
But that's part of the job, I mean, really, if anything, that's making you a better soldier, because if you could break it down, Barney style, if you will, and that's what you have to do overseas anyway with national forces. It's the same thing. Treating it. That's why I think it's the Special Forces course. Well, I know it's the Special Forces course where we're placing the first portion to where it's as a fresh recruit. I think it's even before selection, but I might be wrong on that one. They keep moving things around. But you have to be a member of the G camp, for Robin Sage.
Right.
And seeing it from that end, I think it's invaluable, honestly, seeing it from that end. And then, this is what they have to deal with. And we literally are like, host national forces right now.
That's right. So I just say that only to say it's so important to constantly be reevaluating yourself and recognizing where you stand in the world vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And I don't mean that in a chest, beating way, but remember, like, well, it's memento mori. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Remember, you will die. Like, you can spend the time you've got between now and then beating your chest and talking about what an alpha wolf you are, or you can be a really decent human being who's out there helping other folks, asking for help when you need it, acknowledging the gaps in your own defenses and trying to fill them. And so taking that back to how to veteran, that's what I see as the thing to do. And for me, the form that has taken is I figured out, okay, I love this writing thing. It's beneficial to me, and I started doing it. And then a therapist in Asheville, North Carolina, named Elizabeth Haney, reached out to me and said, hey, look, I'm running this program for the North Carolina the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance. And we would like you to consider doing it in the eastern half of Carolina. And what that ultimately became is it's a Zoom based, just because I figured out that for the GWAT crowd, it's a little older crowd out in Western Carolina. They're more organized around the VA where they started, which is probably the best VA in the nation. But for us, it's very internet based, not least because a lot of my connections were Camp Lejeune connections. I'm in Wilmington. Lejeune's an hour north. There's other Marines that live an hour farther north than that. It just made sense ultimately to do it online. That led to, I've got, veteran writers in Fiji. I've got veteran writers in Colorado. I've got veteran writers all over that log in on Wednesday nights when we're running a group. And we all work together and write. And so that's been super beneficial. And then that led to the folks up at the Traumatic Brain Injury Clinic at Camp Lejeune, the Intrepid Spirit Return to Forces program, of which I'm an alumni, asking if I'd do the same thing as part of their therapeutic program. And so I do that too for active duty folk.
That's actually an interesting tie-in. Like how does that work with the TBI, and like how does writing and stuff work in with people with TBIs?
So, I mean, certainly I have mild TBI. I know you've been beat around a fair bit too. And I read the book. And so there's a rewiring of neural pathways that has to happen. If you're going to get back to what drove me to the TBI clinic when I was getting ready to retire, and it was like, okay, I'm going to stop ignoring stuff that I've been ignoring for 25, 26, 27 years. It's the old walk it off, right? You jump, you about break your ankle off, and you tape it up and go back to work, kind of thing. And I say, okay, it's becoming a kind of almost a MARSOC checkout sheet thing. Go to the 5-week TBI clinic when you're retiring, out of MARSOC. But the real purpose of that program is to grab Marine soldiers, sailors, what have you, at the 12, 13, 14-year mark, get them wired back together and back into the fight.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of the folks that I see are at that tail end of their careers. I'm still glad they're doing it. I'm glad I did it. But so you go and they do a week of diagnostics, and then they do 4 weeks of treatment. And really, they're just mostly introducing you to different treatment modalities, whatever that might be. And the great thing for me in that program was I had sent a ton of Marines to the clinic aboard the MARSOC compound, the Luke Milam Clinic, named after MARSOC's first casualty, a sailor, corpsman, to see the psychs. And I had a very good relationship with the psychs because I was the XO of multiple MARSOC units, and I had dealt with all of the psychs, financial therapists, chaplains, pick a thing. But I was never going to use that myself because Marine officers don't go to the psych. And then a very good friend of mine from a special mission unit said, yeah, I've been going, because it's kind of like, I'm just trying to wire my brain the same way I try to get my deadlift bigger, or shoot straighter. I figured I'd be a better, quote, operator if I had everything sorted. And that got me primed so that when I went to that 5-week clinic, you don't have the option to not see the psych. And you don't have the option to not see the neurologist, and everybody's going to go to music therapy, and everybody's going to art therapy. There's no a la carte. And the beautiful thing of that is I walked in, I was like, I'm here to say yes. Whatever you got, I'm here to say yes. Whether I believe in it or not, I'm down. And at the end of it, they put you at the head of a table with your treatment team all the way around. And I mean everything, from social workers and you name it. And I remember saying to them, you really shouldn't put a guy like me at the head of the table, because that's where I typically sit. And I'm going to start telling you what to do if you put me at the head of the table. And they were like, well, guess what? We just tricked you. That's what we want out of you. You're in charge of yourself. So we start going around the table, and they're giving me feedback from 4 weeks, which they did every week there. And I got to the psych, and I was like, hey, this was great and all, but do I need to keep doing this? And she said to me, and I say this all the time, I'm simultaneously proud of this, and I think it's indicative of how I think now. She says, you're one of the most psychologically stable human beings I've ever met, but you seem to be getting something out of talking to me. And I was like, I think I am. Should we keep doing this? She's like, you want to? Sure. So I still see her 4 or 5 years later. And she asked me if I would be a part of this therapeutic program and work the 8-week writing therapy group that we do into a 4-week program specifically for Intrepid Spirit. And so what I say to the guys and gals coming through there now is, this is an armory tour.
Mhm.
And I walk through, and there's mortars over here, there's rockets, there's sniper rifles. I got machine guns over there. You may not be qualified on sniper rifles, so that rifle's not useful, or that weapon's not useful to you. But you may have been a mortarman in a previous life, whatever, and that is a good system for you to utilize. It's no different than walking through and going, music therapy, art therapy, biofeedback, physical therapy, whatever. Here it all is. Take what's useful to you. I do yoga now. That's the thing they always talk about, taking what's useful to you. Take what is of advantage to you. Music therapy is great. Wasn't my thing. But it absolutely was a thing for another Raider that came through later when I was thinking, and now he volunteers as a music therapist there. So I kind of say to people, you got to be open to that stuff. But anyway, that's what led to me doing a writing therapy group in 6 return to forces cohorts annually.
Do you have a particular story that you want to share about someone that came in and like the difference you saw or what they got out of it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a small benefit, and sometimes it's somebody who really embraces it. And I've had a couple of and it is all guys so far. Typically, it's guys out of the soft community or EOD types. It's folks have been beat around the head.
Yeah.
You get some senior infantry folk, which is honestly one of my favorites when you get because now I'm seeing E9s from the infantry come through, and they're guys who were E3s in, 2005. And
It's crazy.
it is,
To think
you
about
realize
in that way.
it
Yeah.
is, you realize how old you are, but you also, those are the cats that I always enjoyed so much because they're just the real deal.
Yeah.
And some of those folks have moved on and come into my 8-week group. Some of those folks we've published in Lethal Minds Journal, and I'll talk about Lethal Minds in a minute. So, I mean, I consider that a big success. Or I had one particular cohort, and it was just the vibe of the 6 guys that came together for that 5-week period was super amazing. And, some were soft guys, some were not. All of them were folks with significant deployment histories, and they just clicked. And I watched real live tough guys like break down crying when they were reading something they were writing. I mean, and it surprised all of us the first time it happened, but then you went, oh no, I get this. So, I mean, that's a general thing. I had one Raider who was like, dude, I don't write. I don't write anything. I don't read. I don't write. Okay, cool. Sounds good. No worries. And he sat by me for 3 of the 4 weeks we were together, just like this. And he wasn't a jerk at all. He just was not engaged.
Yeah.
And on the last day, he both read something and wrote something. And I was like, this is a major breakthrough for this guy. Whether it's ever good or whether he ever does this again, he gave it a shot. And it doesn't have to be useful to everyone, but I think for most of us, telling stories is so critical, right? I mean, there's so many, both historical / anecdotal evidence of, back in the days, the Native Americans come back from battle and they tell the story.
Yes.
And if you don't get that out, it can be really bad, which is the genesis of the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance, which was a bunch of Vietnam cats who came home from the war and got back in the hollers in Western North Carolina and didn't come back out again, figuratively speaking, for decades. You've got to tell your story.
Yeah, that parallel to the Native American, like the tradition of the war party coming back and then going through, they have an actual sequence, and I have to get it down because there's storytelling involved, there's the sweat lodge involved, and there's some other, I think it was like, there's like a sequence of 4. But there's a reason why they did that, and there's a reason, like, why aren't we addressing things in that way? And like what you were saying there with that is a huge breakthrough for that guy to write something down, because it wasn't that, he was writing, it's that he was facing that trauma, instead of like you were saying, folding the arms and just listening. At the same time, it's kind of ruminating there. But when he was putting that pen to paper, that's when it's coming through. And that is, for a lot of guys to face this stuff, even with my book, when people came back and saying, "Hey, man, like I'm proofreading this particular chapter," and this was with my unit when I was sending out different things to the guys. Hey, read this snippet, see what you think after we had interviewed and stuff. And they're like, man, like some of them came back with, I don't know if I can, or give me a few weeks. They wanted to do it, but at the same time, they were getting smells and stuff of the battlefield. And they're like, dude, I'm in my living room on my couch and I smell the shit river in Afghanistan. What the heck? So I know on that end, I guess it was, at least for me, it was very therapeutic because there's portions of that book to where, I've had it happen before where they ask something and I'm like, honestly, give me a second because it's almost erased from my memory right now. And I've got to go back and look at it because my mind was like, I'm at peace with this now. It's okay. You've processed it. You've gone through it. And I understand it now. And I don't know what it is exactly, but it's almost like it broke it down at least to that visceral level of you were re-experiencing it. And there were chapters written in, or there's things that I've written before in tears. But knowing that was coming through, or knowing that the mind was processing that end of things. And I think that, at least from my experience and experiencing that was so valuable for me, that what you're doing out there in spreading that type of therapy for other people is phenomenal. Yeah. And I mean, Lethal Minds, is that something that's kind of like branched off of that was first, correct?
Yeah, Lethal Minds is a discrete effort, but there's a lot of then overlap in all of it. So Lethal Minds happened, and it was brainchild of Tom Schumann, who the book, is always faithful. And another guy named Graham, and both of them, one an Army officer, one a Marine officer, and they looked at kind of the world and went, there's a million places for 04s and 05s to pontificate. The Marines Gazette, Marine Corps Gazette, like you can write your thoughts on the latest supply management chain system or whatever it is you're going to talk about in the Marine Corps all day long. If you're a lieutenant colonel or a major, it's almost expected. But where does the E1 offer their thoughts? Where does the 03 offer her thoughts? What if I'm doing poetry? What if I'm doing art? But really, it was started to be more professional kind of writing than we've been publishing. Still very open to that for folk, and we've done it. But so they started it, and Tom put out on social media, hey, we're starting this Lethal Minds Journal thing, submissions by this date. And I had a short story that was relevant and had been rejected by every single literary journal I'd ever sent it to, quickly. And I said to Tom, well, I got this short story. I'll submit it if you want. He's like, well, take it. And I was like, oh, great. Okay. So that got published. And there was a story in the first volume of Lethal Minds that I took exception to, and not because of the editorial bent of it. That is up to the writer. And now as editor-in-chief, I maintain that stance. I don't have to agree with it. I just have to offer space for people to express it. But I took exception to it, and they were like, well, if you're going to complain, are you going to help us fix it? 3 years later, here I am as the editor-in-chief, and we're still trying to offer that space for folks to get their thoughts on paper, whether it's professional thoughts or personal thoughts or, retrospective thoughts. And now we've kind of expanded it to, we do a whenever kind of series called 12 Questions with a Writer. We email that out. We're looking hard at adding what I call veteranpreneurship section to Lethal Minds to talk to folks like you to say, hey, how did you do what you did? There's a guy named Sitreps Destirkos who runs an Instagram page. He's got business school covered. He doesn't need any help from us on helping service members move from the ranks to a top 20 business school to, a high paying finance job or whatever. For us, it's more, I wanted to do a thing. It was probably non-standard. So how did you do it? And I think that's kind of an underserved population of transitioning vets anyway, because I went through a number of transition courses when I went out. I went to Dartmouth College's Tuck School of Business for 11 days, and did their Next Step program, which is phenomenal. A lot of folks I know have done the 30-day Stanford, whatever they call the boot camp for entrepreneurs out there that I hear amazing things about. I went through the Honor Foundation, which is a Naval Special Warfare based transition outfit that's 12 weeks long, and they've continually opened their aperture to include more and more and more branches of SOF in the thing. So it's basically, how do you become a civilian after X years of intense behavior in this other thing?
Yeah.
So I went through all of those, but they all are designed to produce a certain thing, which is it's both understandable and appropriate, right? If there's a clear track for success, you're coming out of the 82nd Airborne, you're going to go interview at this software company, you're going to be a software salesperson, you're going to move up, 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 up. It's a 6-figure job. Like, no one can argue with any of that, or should. But if you're somebody who wants to be a teacher, or you're somebody who wants to make the next greatest flip-flop, there's nothing that really emphasizes the how did you do that. And but having said that, when I went through the Dartmouth program, they had what are basically panels. They have a panel day where they have entrepreneurs, they have finance, they have whatever the big things that typically B school graduates do. And the only one where I didn't at the end of it go, I want nothing to do with that, was entrepreneurship. And I didn't, and really still kind of don't consider myself an entrepreneur. I am self-employed, but I don't do profit and loss statements. If my business collapses, no one's impacted but me.
Yeah.
I think more of entrepreneurship is, I got 2 or 3 employees that are counting on me, or 15 or whatever. But regardless, having said that, the Honor Foundation gave me a business coach, and I worked with that guy and then some folks he introduced me to. And I had already said, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to give this writer thing a shot. I'm rowing the boats ashore and I'm burning them at the waterline. And I'm not going to do the traditional lieutenant colonel to middle level management track at SAIC. And in 3 years, I'll make $300,000. It's not. And so I was, talking to the guy one day, and I'm like, oh man, I'm not doing that or that or that. I'm a writer, man. I'm an artist. I'm done with hierarchy. And he says to me, do you plan to send people an invoice for your work? I do. Are you going to prospect for more work and pitch people to do more work for them? I am. Stunningly low paid, I might add, but nonetheless work. And so we got through all those questions he asked me. And finally, he goes, you're a fucking businessman and you need to start acting like it.
He spoke Marine.
Yeah, it was some of the best advice I ever got in my life. You can obviously beat me out if you need to, but it was phenomenal advice. And I didn't always get along with that guy, but I had cited him a million times since as having significant positive impact on my life by making me think like, okay, yeah, you got to treat this thing like a business or like an operation.
That is one of the things is we do great with frameworks, and that is a lot of what business is there is some stuff to bootstrapping and everything, but those frameworks, we can follow a framework.
Yeah. And you just need somebody to give it to you or explain to you it exists. And within the writing world, like, there've been very few folks in the vet community though there have been some, who I could reach out to for mentorship. So there was a lot of figuring it out in the gaps between mentoring sessions. You know what I mean?
So leading up to where you're at now and what you're doing now with writing, it's clear that was your passion and that's where you put your direction in. And if somebody's feeling that draw, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to them with their own writing or pursuing that end of things or feeling it out?
I think that's a superb question, actually. And that there's some subtext to it. Like I said earlier, don't follow your bliss, follow what you're good at, which means doing a serious self-inventory of where am I in the moment. I wanted to be a writer when I was in my 20s, but I didn't really want to be a writer. I wanted to be a specific writer I admired a lot. And I didn't want to, well, A, you can't. And B, I didn't want to do the work involved in being a writer. I wanted to be the perfect idea of a writer. It's just like the guy who always tells you he's going to selection. And then he cuts out as soon as he gets to selection. He just wanted to know he was going to selection. And so,
Yeah.
again, using a military phrase, you want to talk about it or you want to be about it. So decide if you're going to be about it. And if you're going to be about it, it means evaluating how good am I at this? Now, the thing I tell folks, and I feel I've just hit the point in my life/career that I even have any validation to say this. You get to decide what success is as for you as a writer. Unlike a lot of other career fields, it's all on you. And if you want to be the $6,400 a year writer and you're happy at it and it brings you satisfaction, no one can tell you you're not a success, in my estimation. I want to make a living at this, at least enough to pad my retirement check in a way that keeps me in the style to which I have become accustomed. And to do that means writing for bigger and bigger publications. It means selling books. It means, speaking when I get called upon to do so. It means establishing certain credibility. But I had this conversation the other day with a friend of mine. I'm a board member on the North Carolina Writers Network. And I was talking to a fella I knew through that and kind of saying, for me, success is making a living and getting bylines in more and more prestigious but popular entities. For other people, it's getting published in a literary journal that no one's ever heard of, but that incredibly well-trained and informed and thoughtful, literary type writers are the gatekeepers for. And if that's your threshold, awesome. Because again, this, unlike the military, this is not one size fits all. If you're going to score a first-class physical fitness test, you have to do things X, Y, Z, and not at all true in writing. But I think I'm having a relatively successful career in the kind of popular writing space. There's still stuff I'd like to do that I've not at all cracked the code on. And I'm still trying to learn that stuff left, right, and center. But as far as creative nonfiction, the ability to sell an article largely in the outdoor space, but in some other places, that I'm starting to figure. Doesn't mean I'm always, I got a rejection the other day. And it's an idea that I think is awesome. And so far, everyone else thinks it's awesome, but they're not willing to pay me for it. So.
Yeah. You got to find those pockets.
Yeah. And so I just think that, taking that serious look at yourself and asking whether you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, to use LinkedIn kind of garbage, to do the thing you've set before yourself, or do you need to acquire more skills? Or is honestly, that's just never going to be a thing you're going to be that good at. So you need to set your sights, at least your intermittent sights, on a different target than I'm going to write a book to make $1 million, which is what I get Marines and such come to me with. Oh man, we did this deployment. It's an amazing story. I want to write it. Okay, write it, dude. And then they think they're going to get rich. And one, I can tell you ain't, because there are very few folks that are getting rich. Writing is just not a thing. But you can have a really wonderful experience and make a decent amount of money. And two, if your skills are not where they need to be there yet, what do you have to do to get them there? And I firmly believe reps will do a lot to help someone. But that being said, one of the reasons I'm not a visual artist, which I have some skill at, I knew I was never going to hit the standard of the people around me who I admired so much. Like just fellow, folks that could draw, paint, whatever else. I just can't hit it. And I was always going to be angry and annoyed and frustrated by my own lack of skill and or talent. I just don't have that level. And I've done a number of stories on painters at this point to recognize like they just have an ability. It doesn't matter how much school I do and how much stuff I slap on a canvas. I'll never be able to do that. And it's always going to drive me crazy. If it's not going to bother you, it doesn't matter. But if it bugs you, figure out another way to either do it or do something else.
I've read some of the articles and stuff that some of the outdoors ones, and it's literally you're painting a picture just using words. It's a different
exactly.
form.
It's achieving a similar end. It's just I figured out I'm really good at words by normal standards, not by the exceptional standards of some of the people I hang around. But I am. I'm good at doing that. There's a million things I can't do well. I think I think, despite having a fair number of badges and baubles and stuff left over from the Marine Corps. I think I'm probably a better writer on the balance than I was a Marine officer. And I think I was, better than adequate at that. But this is where I've figured out, like, I draw this tremendous amount of passion from, regardless of, how much. I wrote an essay and turned it in the other day. And it ended up being 3,500 words, and it was supposed to be 2,000 when I pitched it about 2 years ago. And when a guy agreed to pay me not much money for it, and he's a good buddy, it doesn't matter. But the point is, by the time I'm done with it as a business proposition, I've probably made negative 0.12 cents, in the doing. But it was a passion project.
And sometimes driving those, like, it's weird. Sometimes I've found that you have to put out some of the negative, like the stuff that has negative returns first, to where I would say the analogy of a rocket ship, to where you're expending a ton of fuel at the bottom on the launch pad, but it's getting easier and easier as you're starting to reach the upper atmosphere, and you're not needing as much fuel once you get momentum and stuff going.
Yeah, and you do have to do some of that at the outset, but I also think people overestimate how much of it they have to or should do. I say again and I do a fair bit of so you want to write conversations, just like I do a fair bit of either you want to join the Marine Corps or, oh, so your kid wants to join the Marine Corps. I do that talk a fair bit with parents. And what I would say is, if somebody comes at me and says, oh, think of the exposure you're going to get if you write for us. I can't pay you, but think of the exposure. My response is, people die from exposure. I read Krakauer's Into Thin Air. I know how that goes. I'm not interested. In any business, a creative business, especially where you are self-employed, no one will value you if you don't.
Yes, that is absolutely true. Yeah.
And let the market decide. If you've overvalued yourself, the market will tell you.
Oh, yes, it will. Yes, it will.
And it has. I have been told.
Well, where can we find more of your stuff? Do you have like a link tree? I know you got Russell Worth Parker.
Yeah, and I'm bad at keeping them as updated as I should. But yeah, there's a link tree. I use my full name, Russell Worth Parker, for everything. I go by Worth. You're welcome, identity thieves. And my link tree is Russell Worth Parker. My website, which hasn't been updated since the fall of Kabul, is russellworthparker.com. You can certainly find me at Lethal Minds on Substack. So I'll write an editorial there each month. You can hit me at Instagram. That one is worth.parker. But the one I really encourage vets to reach out to, if they want to, is at Bookwar, which is B00KWAR. And I started that as a way to talk about books and publishing and writing, and to push my fellow vets in that space, which is a term that makes me want to punch myself about like looking at LinkedIn. But I am big on that. Like, it doesn't mean I'm going to read every single veteran's book that I get sent, but I'm going to try. And I certainly want to push them, and I push them because I think, as I keep saying, you don't have to be the next great writer. You just need to tell your story, because America needs to hear your story.
Yeah.
Because everything you did in their name, which means they did it too by proxy. And I think a lot of our citizenry misses that point.
Yeah. I've had multiple people reach out that I would have never thought of, impacting them and stuff. And it's just made everything so much more worth it, to where it's like, I didn't foresee that type of thing happening. So I know what you're saying there. It is. As far as the North Carolina Veterans Writing Association, how can people learn more about that?
So they have a Facebook page. I think it's actually under Brothers and Sisters Like These.
Okay.
They certainly can reach out.
I'll make sure
to
to put
me
that stuff in the description link.
I appreciate it. And then they've done, I think, 3 compendiums of writing from this effort they've done 2. They're working on a 3rd under the title Brothers and Sisters Like These. And I would say, like, this writing program that I do online, the Zoom-based one, it is open to people outside of North Carolina. It just happens to have started here. So
Yeah.
no one should feel constrained. The only requirement for you to be a part of it is either you've got a DD-214 or you may someday. I don't care. It doesn't matter. If you were a refrigerator repairman in the Coast Guard for 2 years, you're in. We don't do, and I stole this from Tom Schumann, there's no such thing as there's just a, or I was just a. You raised your hand, you served, period, full stop.
Sometimes we forget that, it's like we were talking about earlier in the conversation. We feel marginalized or, oh, I wasn't that special. And it's like, no, you played a part.
Well, I think that would be that you asked me a question about a success story. And I have a guy who's in his third iteration of the 8-week class, and he's a Vietnam vet, and he carried around a ton of guilt for undeservedly, in my estimation, for decades, because he was he worked an admin job in Vietnam. And how many people actually went to Vietnam, and how many people have volunteered to serve their nation, and how many have actually answered the call? You don't have anything to feel bad about for the way in which you answered the call. You have nothing but to feel good for. And so, I think that's an incredibly important message. And I think talking earlier, as you brought up about guys who were out there thumping their chest about what they did, and it's only cool if you did thing X, Y, or Z, frankly, is markedly and scientifically demonstrated as destructive.
It's a lot of those people, and it stinks to see, because you can see it. You can call out bullshit. Not everybody can see it, at least not right away. But then that string starts to unravel, and it's a dangerous game they play. And hopefully,
right.
it doesn't end up to be. Yeah, it doesn't end up being something too self-destructive, because hopefully they see that light and they turn onto a different path, because there's a bunch of them out there, and it's unfortunate. Because it kind of, if anything, it's hurting the veteran space, because they're growing that divide amongst the rest of us instead of us binding together. This isn't a competition. This should be a collaboration, just like we did the military. When were we our strongest? It's working
100%.
together across.
100%. And reflecting on, who you have the most in common with. Somebody who spent 14 months as a clerk in the green zone in Baghdad, or somebody who never once considered visiting the recruiter's office. I know who I'm more aligned to.
Yeah. Worth, is there any parting advice you could give us?
I will double down on following your talent and following what you're truly good at. I will also say that come to the realization now that, unlike the military, there is not a board somewhere that's going to review all your records, decide whether you're worthy for the next thing that you want to accomplish. No one but you has input on it. I mean, the world has a say, right? But ultimately, you get to decide what it is that you want to do and what it is that makes you successful at that thing. And if you can define that level of success and hit it, you're a success, full stop. Nobody else gets to evaluate you in any way, shape, or form. To me, the only failure is laying around not trying to do stuff.
That's some damn good advice. Absolutely right. Hey,
Worth,
hang tight for a minute. Yeah, right. Hang tight for a minute. I want to ask you about something afterwards, but thanks for coming on the show and taking some time to pass along this stuff. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Veteran Success Story. If you found the content within this episode valuable, like it, review it, subscribe. It helps. I'm trying to keep everything free here for this in order to spread the information. And those do more than you know in the way of getting the word out there. Also, take a look in the description links and go check out and follow, peruse through the archives of the Lethal Minds Journal. absolutely great outlet for getting some veteran writing looked at. And more importantly too is go look at some of these workshops. I know it's through the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance, but it's open to everybody. You know, I think Worth said it in the episode that this is something that he runs nationwide. I mean, as a matter of fact, even globally. And it's done through Zoom meetings. So this remote capacity is something that opens it up to everybody. And it's these workshops and storytelling. It's an important thing. It really is. It's something that helped myself, and I know has helped multiple others, not only through reading some of the stuff that is put down out there, but then putting your own thoughts and your own experiences to paper. A lot of times it helps us, and it helps the mind work through and process that information of an event that, let's face it, it's outside of what is the ordinary. So again, Lethal Minds Journal, the workshop through the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance, and if you liked, one more time, this stuff, go check out Worth on social media at Book War, and within book, it's 2 zeros instead of O's. So I'm going to put this stuff again, description in the links and stuff. So you should know at least on there. But thank you for joining us on this episode. I hope you found the information in here valuable. And again, join us again next week for another veteran success story.